is Jim Melamed, and I want to welcome you to Mediate.com's second of now 6 forums on issues of online mediation and online mediation training. And the forums are kind of considering different facets of our efforts in this whole new world that we're now operating in. And so what I'd like to do first is to introduce you all to Claire Fowler and Colin Rule, who are the ones who have their hands on the controls. And if you all would speak to the issues of translation and recording and chat and muting and things like that, that'd be awesome.
Sure. So just a couple of things, no big deal. So let's go over some of the basics. We all know how to use Zoom at this point, but roughly, for the most part, we'll probably ask you to stay muted again, just because we're recording and there's always going to be the random barking dog in the background. It will probably be mine, actually. But it's wonderful to see your faces. And if you have a question, please post that in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat and we'll make sure that that gets answered. And we will have, I think we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for questions. So we'll try to handle those via chat, or perhaps unmute yourself and we can just have a conversation if we have time. As Jim mentioned, we also have interpretation, and which is an amazing feature. Way to go, Zoom. So to do that, you'll just click down at the bottom, slight right of your screen where it says interpretation. Right now we have Portuguese available and we're getting Spanish up and running shortly. So another question, somebody's asking if this will be recorded. Absolutely. And we will make this available in the next couple of days. So I think that's about it for Zoom logistics.
Well, I will say also, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, even while the speakers are presenting, and Claire and I will surface them at the appropriate moment. But that, again, as Jim mentioned, that's a nice dynamic of the use of this platform. So please don't be shy about putting all your thoughts. And sometimes the conversations in chat are almost as rich as the presentations. So we will save that chat and we'll synthesize it and we'll share a link to that later as well. So if there's resources you'd like to share and make sure they're included in the record, just drop them in there.
Yep.
Good. And anything about muting? You already mentioned that, didn't you, Claire? I'm sorry. Very good. Very good. Okay. Yeah, this chat thing is pretty amazing. Another dimension. And even if we don't get to your question during the live event here, that will also be distributed to the people head of committees and the like to consider. So we really do value the chat. We do synthesize it to cleanse it of personal comments and protect the guilty, of course. Very good. Yeah, well, at this point, I'm going to try a screen share just one more time. And did that work? Bruce, you're my check, okay? And so what I want to do here is to introduce you all to Woody Mostyn really quickly, who has been this online mediation training task force chair. And it's somewhat analogous to herding cats, if you can imagine that, but he has done a spectacular job. Our ultimate goal is to develop a report during July, and then to have an additional forum where we would present that report, both kind of on what seems to be the current state of things, but also at least some initial recommendations and suggestions for most capably moving forward. So without further ado, Woody, you're on.
Thanks, Jim. I'm looking around and I'm thinking of the peacemaking that you all do in so many different ways in your own communities. And for us to maybe take a moment and think about what it was like a year ago and what it's like today. And the memories and the that will be imprinted in all of us, much like during the Great Depression, the idea of standing in soup lines or selling apples, losing businesses, affected maybe some of us as we were growing up, from our parents who told us to clean our plates and make sure that we never, ever wasted anything. And then throughout the entire 60s and early 70s, when there was the war in Indochina and the problems that occurred politically in so many countries that affected all of us, many of us. It affected our dreams, our hopes, and also the losses of people who are no longer with us. And during the last year, how many of our children and grandchildren will be able to tell their children and grandchildren what it was like to have masks when they got a chance to go to school, and the rest of the time being stifled by us as we tried to get them to do Zoom school, which is so difficult for us, let alone for our children who are trying to make it in this very fast-paced world. The same is true for us professionally. And not just in our profession. We now can see our doctors via Zoom. We can get our taxes done via Zoom. We're able to connect with our professional colleagues via Zoom. If anyone wants a real overview of what it's like for families to have gone through the last year, our wonderful colleague, Michael Lang, has produced a book that is free. It's available on mediate.com. It's available on Moss and Guthrie. It's available from Michael. And it has over 90 chapters of families struggling through the pandemic. And not only is the price right, but the inspiration will help all of us get a frame and a perspective on what we're doing. And just today, the ABA Journal came out with a wonderful article of virtual legal services unbundled, and how companies are thriving from meeting a need that has been going on for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. So, and this type of service has been in development for quite a long time. You are in for an incredible treat today. Two of my absolute favorite people have worked tirelessly, actually, to think through what would be the key lessons and takeaways for all of us on online mediation training. The first is Donna Silverberg, who is from Oregon. I have to tell you, when I met Donna through this task force, and she had me at hello. I have never been as inspired by someone who works with large groups, public policy situations, and has both the skills and the heart to lead us into the next chapter. And the second leader today, I'm not at all embarrassed to say, is my training partner, because for years I trained alone and in person. And this old dog found that new tricks came with a new partner. And there is no one like Susan. She is a force of nature. She has remade online training and marketing, and gives a perspective that all of us will take away starting today. So Donna and Susan, please take it away.
Actually, I'm gonna slip in, Woody, and just do one more little administrative piece so people can appreciate the amazing work that you have done here. So I'm going to try that share screen one more time. Bruce, you're my test here. You see a PowerPoint up there? Beautiful, I love it. And I didn't give you any cash on the side or anything to confirm that. All right, good. So here is today's team. And I just wanted to give you a feel. Now, I've already put this link in the chat, and it's also on the main forum webpage. I put that in there as well. And these are the executive committee members, and all these links work. We've also got an advisory board. And again, if you want to get background on anybody, you just click the link. We've got, I think it's 11 committees at this point. We've had a merger or two of committees, and we've got a number of them represented here today: family and elder, public policy, large group, workplace, particularly. We now have 6 total forums. The first one, the 23rd, is already recorded and posted online. You can easily find it at Mediate. And then we've got today's, the next one on standards, ethics, and new technologies, then experiential training, mentoring, and case consultation, then kind of looking beyond mediation, if you will, to affiliated and associated professions, and then finally a bit of a focus on youth and schools. For me, I'm kind of I used to say meat and potatoes guy, but now it's like beyond meat and potatoes, I guess, or beyond meat and beyond potatoes, so we don't get Twitter messages from the potato group. So these are some of the just most fundamental issues that I'm grappling with in terms of trying to implement all this stuff. Well, first is there an online mediation curriculum that, if you will, all mediators should reasonably know? And this comes from an observation that every case is now an online case. And all of our standards for training and curricula were developed really in pre-internet worlds. So now that we're in this different world, what do mediators reasonably need to know in terms of all of the online capacities and potentials? And how would we best define an additional modular curriculum, and how would we implement any such definition? Next question: how can we most effectively train mediators online? And I offer, this is not just to train online mediators, this is to train all mediators. And I'm just blown away, for example, of the benefits of being able to record people in breakouts and give them personalized feedback. You used to have to schlep all kinds of video equipment and have forever, to get that job done. But now, in a very nimble way, you can really give people laser beam feedback on exactly what they can do to improve in a private and safe way. And now the other question I have is, I think lots of people going into the field now are going to say, I really don't need to be a face-to-face mediator. I don't need to pay that high brick and mortar rent and all the other aspects. I will note as a side comment that all of this online mediation and online mediation training is remarkably green. It's just a very fortuitous coincidence, but we're clearly doing the right thing in terms of saving the earth and climate change and the like. And my question is, for folks getting going now, or people that are revamping their practices where they really want to focus on online mediation, could they take care of all training requirements, all experiential requirements, all role play, you name it, online? Because that's one question, because I would offer it, it's probably a bit presumptuous to think that we would force somebody that wants to do nothing but online mediation to take face-to-face trainings, I think. And to the extent that they could take care of their training online, how much of that training needs to be live? And to what extent might it be recorded? Could the whole training be recorded? So those are some of the just kind of practical, ultimate questions that I have. And it's at this point that I'm thrilled to pass the baton, I believe, to Donna. Is that accurate, Donna?
I believe that is accurate, Jim. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here, and I mean that in so many different ways. I think my screen has failed 3 times since I got online this morning, which is the first time I've ever had that happen, where my screen just keeps going black. But I keep signing back in. Really happy to be here, and I want to say many, many thanks to Woody and to Jim for asking me to join this effort and to be part of the executive committee. This has really been an honor. It's been mind expanding, and at a time where psychologists are talking about languishing during the pandemic, this has been a great way not to be languishing. So thank you both for allowing me to be here. Thank you to Susan and Claire for getting ready for today's session, and also to Tawny Robertson, who's going to be joining me talking about the public policy component of this. I'm a public policy mediator in Portland, Oregon. I teach at Pepperdine University and Lipscomb University in Nashville. I also do training in other places and with other organizations, and have been a reluctant, I will say I was a reluctant online mediation trainer. They kept saying to me at the universities, can you please do your class online? And I said, no, large group work can't be trained online. And then the pandemic hit, and they called me because I had 2 weeks till class, and they said, could you think that over again? And I said, I'm in, I'll figure it out. So I have found that there are so many benefits, there are many challenges, and I think that between Susan, Claire, and I, and those who we are bringing in from our subgroups to talk to you today, we're hoping to identify some of them. We're hoping that you're going to help us identify many of them as well by using the chat, and really look forward to talking about all this with you. Our goal today, as we were trying to decide how to set this up, was really to look from a spatial setup rather than just 3 very separate. I mean, we do have 3 very separate presentations we're going to give, but we thought we would start with family, with the smallest numbers of people who we tend to think of being at the table. Move on to workplace, where that might expand depending on the size of the work team, and then move on to public policy, where things expand even more. We felt that, as I think the whole executive committee has been saying, there are some consistencies that happen for any kind of mediation, and then there are some things that might be separate and unique for particular sectors. So today, that's the way we're doing it with these 3 areas. And we're going to start off with just a lightning round, and then Susan, and then Claire, and then I will be talking about these things. So Susan and Claire, can you say, you know, if people can only stay for the first half hour, let's say, right, can we at least leave them with 9 tips, right? So 3 things each. What from your sector, Susan, would you say are that some of the three things that really stand out for your sector with regards to effective emerging online mediation training or practice?
Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Guthrie, and I'm representing the Family and Elder Committee. And just to piggyback a little bit on what Donna said, I do want to first say it's been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this and to be working with Woody and Jim and Claire and Donna to get ready for this forum has especially been quite a joy. So quick takeaways to train, effective ways to train mediators online generally would be that it would need to be conducted in an online meeting format. The webinar format is much less effective because it does not allow for that interactivity. Also, keeping the participants at a minimum or not expanding to the extent that we can because we're online. Look at us right now. We have 159 people online. Might not work well in an interactive training, and being able to use some of our recorded function to help with feedback as we go along.
Great. Okay. Online meeting, not webinar. Keep the numbers to what you can see on the screen and use the recording to give feedback. Fantastic. Claire, what do you got for us?
Okay. I'm going to lose my train of thought if I don't share my screen. So let me go to my notes here.
Okay. So there's one thing, right? And we decided to hit 3 things here, right?
3 things. So first thing, just the importance of understanding trauma and culture-informed training, that there needs to be some kind of an understanding of what people have gone through. And so instead of just jumping in like we're the savior and we can fix everything, really spending time, even though we're online and it might feel a little awkward, making sure that we're still spending that time with people, just understanding the difficulties that they've had. That was probably one of the big foci of our conversation, one of the big focuses. Next, just the importance of flexibility, as we have all learned. That has really been the theme of this last year, right? Being flexible, the importance of shifting the lengths of meeting around what it works for our clients, the times of meeting, and just being comfortable trying different processes and platforms. The third one, being resourceful, taking the time ahead of the meeting to educate yourself, understand their business a little bit, understand what might be useful, some apps, some suggestions, articles, and also be resourceful in terms of who you can connect people to. So taking the extra half an hour before a mediation or a training to make sure that you have resources to offer people. So those were the 3 biggest things I think that came out of ours.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, Claire. So really that trauma based, so that you're focusing on empathy, which can be difficult to convey online without great care, right? So, and flexibility and resourcefulness is what I'm hearing from you for 3, 4, and 5. And then I think from our sector, we would add, providing trainees with templates for online discussion protocols. So I learned the term from my new best friend, Susan Guthrie, yesterday, really providing what we call netiquette to people, right? So letting them know what it is that we're anticipating from them in our training and in our practice. I think a second big one would be making sure everybody is familiar with and comfortable in the platform in which we're training. And, I can put in parentheses, or practicing, right? We don't want to take that for granted that everybody knows. And we suggest from our end using a graphic slide to actually to be sure that everybody sees and hears the instructions, just as we do in our cases. So we really want to try to model in our training what the facilitation or mediation might look like when people get out to be working with a large group, because it's a perfect setting to learn how to do large group work in a training of a larger group, right? And then the third takeaway our group would have is show by example. What many of us have learned is that many people have never seen a public policy conflict handled well. And so having some time during the session, whether it's a video or a live simulation, where somebody who knows what they're doing is actually showing students, trainees how to do it, is very important in the public policy end of things. All right, so those were our 9 tips for you. So if you could only make the first half hour, you got 9 tips from this session so far. Now what we're going to do is we're going to dive a little deeper into each of these areas. And so I'm going to turn this over to Susan, who will take us through what is the family sector learning, and what can we all learn, whether we're doing public policy or family, how to be better.
Thank you, Donna. And so as Donna said, we're starting with family because we generally have, start with the smallest mediation style group. But first, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge and thank my committee, who has had a great deal to do with the input that has gone into this presentation. Laura Chong, Ken Newman, Gabrielle Hartley, Peter Salem, Linda Seeley, and Michael Orrit. They've all been absolutely wonderful to work with, and you will hear from several of them today. Gabrielle is joining me right now as we go through just the history of family mediation, and then where we've gone during COVID and where we see us going as we go into training beyond. So first, and I know you're seeing a blank screen here, we thought it would be helpful to first just have a little context of where family and elder mediation might be a little different than what many other sectors see as their mediations. I've been talking to Donna about these massive meetings that she has. Our family mediations are generally very small and intimate. They are often just with the couple who are getting divorced or going through a family or elder matter proceeding. Even when represented by counsel, it's generally those 5 people in the room in an in-person. So as you can see in these 2 photos, even as we've moved online, they still tend to feel fairly intimate and small. And even when we are very collaborative in the family and elder field, even when you might bring in and layer in additional professionals, such as a financial professional or a therapist or coach, you still have that intimate and small feeling.
So family and elder mediation can roll out in a variety of ways. Typically, they either happen in a sequential manner, meaning you have many shorter mediation sessions, or they roll out in a long haul where you might have 1 or 2 sessions that can last as long as a full day, or maybe 2 or 3 days in a row where we're truly burning that midnight oil.
And I think that's probably what many people think of as a mediation, that long session. But you know, historically, family and elder mediation has approached, I think, mediation training, much as many other sectors, with the traditional 40-hour basic. And what has really become apparent to me, especially working on this task force, was finding out that the 40-hour designation was really sort of an arbitrary number to start with. In fact, it wasn't intended to be 40 hours. It was supposed to be 48, but the hotel wasn't available for the final day of that training. Thank you, Jim Melamed, for that story. I did not know that. But what we realized is many of our, historically our trainings, and Gabrielle and I both, our first 40 hours, were much like this, in a classroom, in a smaller setting. In fact, Woody Mostyn, who opened up our training or our task force forum today, has historically conducted them in his living room with about 18 participants. So again, a smaller, more intimate setting. And, you know, generally these 40-hour trainings cover what we call the basics of what you need to know to be a mediator. This list, this little laundry list here of the negotiation theory and skills, but really the skills are the part that are the most important, right, Gabrielle?
Yeah, so most mediation trainings, whether they're 30 hours, 40 hours or beyond, have about 7 to 8 hours of actual content. And then the other 30, 40, however many more hours are spent engaging with the process. So it's more experiential. But as anyone who has either given a mediation training or taken a mediation training knows, you cannot possibly cover all topics or get deep enough into any of the topics to go out there and just call yourself a mediator.
Yeah, and that takes us to what's also sort of become the norm in our industry is the need for more trainings and the development of additional trainings. And we now have and see a wide cross, discipline type of trainings out there with domestic violence, high conflict, elder abuse, advanced skills, and more. The key being that the 40 hours has relatively stayed static, and what we've done is added on these additional trainings.
And in some jurisdictions, some of these additional trainings, especially around domestic violence, have become mandatory to be a certified mediator.
Right. So we've added on to that 40 hours, anywhere from like 2 to 10 hours of domestic violence training. So what's really come about is that trainees, as they finish that 40-hour training, and even as they go through some of those additional trainings, they need to find more opportunities before they're really able to mediate.
And a great way that they can do that is to co-mediate if they get a case that maybe they feel is a little bit beyond what they know, or if they just need some more support, you can find an experienced, skilled mediator to mediate with them. Another wonderful thing to do is to observe experienced mediators as they go through a process. And so the new mediator can start to learn how to do things when they're mediating. And Susan, if you could talk about the other two.
Yeah, well, and one of the most common requests that I get as a longtime mediator is people would like me to observe them mediating and give them tips. They would like to be mentored. And often just many young mediators or new mediators, early career mediators, move into volunteer positions or take unpaid mediation positions so that they can start to get that experience.
And so, you know, it's a common number thrown around to become an expert at anything. So I think Malcolm Gladwell said you need 10,000 hours. Well, it could take a very long time to get the 10,000 hours, but you need to start somewhere. And getting this kind of experience is really the way to build your practice and your skill set forward.
And traditionally, that's been difficult when it needed to be in an in-person setting, all of these, co-mediation, observation, mentoring, and volunteer positions. But now we've moved into the COVID era, and much as what Woody said, I mean, think back to just over a year ago, and our mediation trainings looked like that room I showed earlier, where people were sitting in a classroom. But just like all education during COVID has moved online, mediation education has moved online. And this is very much when Woody and I do a training, this is what it looks like. We have a screen full of thumbnails, and we've moved almost entirely, or have moved entirely, into that virtual format. So how's that gone? I mean, really the key question that we started to tackle in our committee is, yeah, we've done it. We didn't have a lot of choice. What do we think of it? How did it go? And we've in fact identified a number of pros and cons.
And so on the pro side, having online mediation training, it's more accessible. It's more convenient. You can be at the beach, you can be in your living room. Although I don't know if you can deliver a training from the beach, maybe Woody can. There's no need.
Golf course.
Exactly. No need to get a location. You can have an increased capacity, which Susan started to address earlier. If you are looking to find a trainer in something very specific who might have been on the other side of the country, you can find someone. If you live in Portland, Oregon, you might find someone in Portland, Maine. There's more courses available. There are breakout room features, which are incredible, and they have that added feature of being able to record. Somebody needs to be muted, actually.
I'm trying to figure out who it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry.
I got it.
So in the breakout room feature, actually, you can record what's happening, and that's such an incredible teaching tool. That the trainer can then take a look at it with the trainee, and the trainee can learn from it by observing their own acts and their own interaction. And of course, we have the capacity to use more varieties of visual aids on the pro side of online mediation training. And so Susan, maybe you can tackle the cons here.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I think it's really important because we tend to get very excited about the pros of online, both online mediation and online mediation training, but there are cons, and we need to acknowledge them and decide if we can manage them or eliminate them. So I think one of the biggest ones that we've identified is not everyone has the available tech that they need in order to participate. Not everyone has access to high-speed internet. Not everyone can afford the equipment. The cost of a laptop might be a barrier for some to participate. We talked about the fact that you can have more participants. Is that a positive? That also might lead to less interactivity. So it might call for either limiting the number or coming up with different ways to increase that interactivity in different ways than we did in person. You also cannot eliminate the effects of Zoom fatigue. I think everybody on the screen, if you've been on Zoom, you know an 8-hour day of training is just not possible anymore. So we have to change that format. We also presume that everyone has the technology skills, the platform skills to participate. I've found that to not be true. And I've spent a great deal of time in trainings telling people how to share their screen or do certain things. So do we need to add that as a part of our training? Where do we squeeze that in 40 hours? And then I've heard from a number of trainers that just in-person activities that they've done don't translate well. So we need to maybe perhaps go back to the pro list and figure out ways to use some of our pros to replace those things. So the question becomes, where does online mediation, where does training go from here, mediation training? And the question is really, is it going to stay online, I think? And Gabrielle, I think we've gotten an overwhelming, resounding.
Yes, yes, yes. It is going to stay online. That does not mean that there will not be opportunity for brick and mortar training, but online training is here to stay, is definitely the resounding sentiment.
Yeah. But it does, yeah.
Oh, and along with that, I'm sorry, Susan. Along with that, we are going to need to add increased competencies on the continuum for the tech part, especially because there are more considerations to bring the greatest degree of professionalism to the online mediation platform. So Susan, maybe you want to take the list.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the list isn't even all inclusive. We've just gone through and identified some of the things that would need to become a part of a curriculum. The question becomes, does it become a part of the 40-hour curriculum, or does it become, like domestic violence training, a separate but necessary curriculum? And how do we deliver that, right? Jim Melamed actually asked, I think, a wonderful question in the beginning. Can we teach online mediation training? Can we teach people to be online mediators in person? Or do we need to teach that online?
And I think what we talked about was that we probably need to be teaching it online, and we probably need to add more time because we can hardly get all of the content out there and all of the skill buildings out there within the 40 hours. And now we have this whole other layer of core competencies that really need to be integrated. So the question may be, do we need the 2 hours or the 10 hours? But we need something more.
Right. And I actually wanted to ask two of our committee members to just come forward. Laura Traum is speaking about an expanded curriculum idea to give an idea of what might be coming for the future. And then Michael Orett is going to talk about a virtual mentoring that he's doing. So I'm going to stop sharing and allow them to speak for a moment. Laura, how about you go first?
Sure, thanks, Susan. So I was just going to speak to a training model that is nearing the completion stages of development in New York State. So the New York State Council on Divorce Mediation is actually finalizing a new training program that shakes up the 40-hour model in a number of ways. So one aspect of the training that is being developed is that it's a 60-hour program, but that is not the traditional 60 hours that simultaneously incorporate doctrinal family law material with skills throughout the course of 5 days, 7 days, what have you. Instead, 20 hours of doctrinal law and some therapeutic concepts, etc., are being presented in pre-recorded webinars online, 20 hours of webinars with quizzes that test the trainees' completion of the webinars and absorption of the material. And then 40 hours of live skills training where everything that they've learned is being kind of experientially taught in a mediated environment. To what Susan was mentioning earlier, the idea of this model, it honors the asynchronous and synchronous learning convenience that trainees may pursue. It also has a hybrid aspect where that live 40-hour skills component can happen once a year online. If trainees plan to practice online, they would be learning how to do so through an online live module. And then there is once a year an opportunity to do that 40-hour skills component in person on site for those trainees who plan to practice in person again, so that the module aligns with the planned form of practice. It's different from what New York State's Part 146 court approval requires. It's broader than that. So those requirements are met, but where, as Susan was suggesting, and as Gabrielle was suggesting, trying to think ahead to the new aspects that we might need to include in the reality that these trainees will be moving into on the business front.
Thank you so much, Laura. And now I'd like to introduce Michael Orritt, who's going to talk to us about ways that online mediation mentorship can actually take place. So Michael.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I think it's important to maybe know a few very quick things for some context. My wife and I, who founded our mediation center 7 years ago, first off, believe that professional mediators who come right out of law school, right out of their psychology degree to practice mediation are just as effective, if not more effective, which honestly is what I actually believe, than mediators who have been doing this for 30 years with experience as attorneys or therapists. We have 4 full-time professional mediators, none of which have had more than a year of professional experience before joining our team. And all of them are under 30, except me, barely. 2 of these mediators, Sarah and Andrew, have been trained completely online. They've had no mediation experience prior to joining us. And Sarah, she started with us 10 days before the pandemic hit, and we all went home. She's been mediating solo now for 9 months. She has successfully mediated 52 cases. Andrew joined us during the pandemic. He's been mediating for 6 months. He's currently overseeing 23 cases. And both of them are very highly skilled. They can handle just about anything. So how do we do it? Number 1, attitude. We just acknowledged together that online training is the greatest opportunity in the history of the field. I hear a lot that online mediation is going to change everything. Well, I actually think it's online mediation training that's going to change everything. So first, we got to believe in this. Second, it's the relationship between the trainee and the trainer. We together embraced just a whole new level of relationship, a bond, a connection between the trainer and the trainee that was just not possible before. So we invested in each other. There's so much courage involved in this approach. Quick thinking, quick acting, vulnerability. We're really in the trenches together, and there's a lot of trust. So now, yeah.
Michael, I think we were hoping also you could mention something about the way the mentor can observe somebody who is maybe training online.
That's really the strategic process. So here's what we do that's different, and it's going to change everything. We communicate with each other in different ways at different times during the mediation in real time through texting, while we're observing each other during actual cases. So during phase 1 of our process, the mediators are spending 3 months observing the trainer. And so what I'm doing during the meeting is I'm focusing on the mediation, but I have simultaneous focus on the training, and I'm communicating by text with the trainee, whatever specific technique, whatever strategy I'm employing. I'm texting them as it's happening, face saving, taking an assertive stance, normalizing, mutualizing. I just text them. And in that moment, what happens is they're seeing it, they're being taught it, and it crystallizes right before their eyes. They see it. Not in hindsight when we're in debrief, we do that too, but in the moment. And I think that's the key, like a doctor, right? A doctor, think about it, right? A surgeon, a chief of surgery, performs the surgery. And as they're performing the surgery, they're telling the intern what they're doing, what they're seeing, what's happening, right? And that's how you train when lives are at stake.
Right.
And that's also like what the doctors do.
And thank you. I call it the fly on the wall kind of training. And I love that capability that we have online. So thank you, Michael. And I love that Orritt Mediation is already doing this. I think of it as where we're going. Michael and his team are already doing this and turning out new mediators faster than we've been able to in the past. So I'm going to pass this over to Claire now so that she can take us into the world of the workplace. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. And I think, unfortunately, Angela, are you still here? She had a mediation an emergency mediation she had to run to. So she said she'd probably have to duck off. Okay, that's all right. She handed me her slides. So.
All right, Claire, I was on mute. I am still here. It's not an emergency mediation. It's been on calendar for a while, so I do have to jump off in about 5 minutes. But thank you so much for your leadership for our group.
Oh, thank you. So I am going to do a quick share screen. And so one of the people on our workplace team was Angela, Angela Reddick-Wright, who has just been such a joy to work with. It's been so wonderful to get to know you, Angela. Thank you. And you'll see as we go through the presentation, so much of this came from her. So thank you for sharing your insights with us. And then we also had Winter Wheeler, who, gosh, just has such a great brain for all of this. It was fun every time we'd throw a question at her. She was like, oh, let's do this and this. And you could just tell her instincts were perfectly primed for this kind of work. And I also wanted to share a book that she has just completed, Networked, just about, I want to share it because I feel like it's very apropos to what we are discussing today. A networking group that has met on LinkedIn during the COVID pandemic and what they have learned from this. And a lot of what they have learned are the same takeaways that we're discussing today. So let's go look at those. All right. I'm just going to move some Zoom controls here. And Angela, again, if you want to chime in while we have a couple of minutes, please feel free to do so. I know you're probably prepping to go help people that need you. So the main reason that we met was to discuss this. What are the key skills that workplaces need to prevent disputes? And this is really, as Jim mentioned, this question emerged from the mediate.com conference last year, where we said, okay, as mediate.com, we have been working for 25 years. I think it makes sense to pause and say, should we continue to do things the same way we have, or should we pause and say, what do we want to continue going forward? And what does it make sense to let go of and adopt some new habits? I liken it to, again, young kids at home. So this is just very visual for me. That moment at the end of the day when kids take off their backpack and dump it on the table and they just lay everything out. I think that's kind of what we did in this task force. We just laid everything out that we have been doing in workplace training. And we said, what do we want to put back in the backpack and continue to carry around? What do we want to leave here? And what are some of the new things that we want to put in the backpack going forward? And so, as I mentioned, we were able to work with Angela, employment mediator and arbitrator, labor law attorney, as well as Winter Wheeler, a civil litigator, mediator and arbitrator, and author. So thank you so much for all of your help. So the first thing that I mentioned, we looked at our past approaches to training. And first we had the professional approaches. These were formal programs such as Strauss Institute, Harvard's program on negotiation that left you with a master's or an LLM program. And it's very, very regimented, very well-designed and well thought out approaches. There's also, of course, the local bar associations and the community mediation centers. And that's more what Susan was referring to, kind of your standard 40-hour basic training. Then we also have legal trainings. This is typically where you have a private firm who's training in-house mediators, or you might be working at a company that has decided to to have a representative mediator in all of their departments. And they would hire a private mediation firm or a law firm coming in to plan and oversee the training. And then the third approach has typically been ad hoc. At some point in life, people decide, I'm a great mediator, I should do this. And so they will take a 40-hour basic training. Then they'll begin mediating and decide, oh, I think I want to do the workplace type of training. And they just add on little bits as they are interested in it. So those are the three main approaches that we have seen in the past. Unfortunately, they're slightly disjointed, right? They haven't completely connected. They have all served a purpose, But the problem is that many of the trainings, as we know, simply don't cover everything, right? There isn't a set of training standards. And as we looked at some of these trainings, we found that these trainings were often designed more as a Band-Aid to solve a specific purpose. So for instance, here in the Northwest, there's a large power company, and as they dealt with certain issues, they brought in a mediation team to train a lot of mediators in their 23 different offices, I believe, but they were designed to fill a specific purpose. So the whole training was aimed at, let's address this one problem. So it was a very symptom approached training as opposed to a complete training. And as we all know, conflicts don't stop, right? We can train people to resolve a very specific conflict, but it's not going to end there. And so that's why we wanted to look at more of a standardized approach and look at what do people need to resolve all the different types of conflicts that are going to come up, and also to be able to prevent additional conflicts. So unfortunately, the main pieces that we were seeing that kept getting pushed out of these shorter ad hoc and symptomatic type of trainings: ethics, not a big focus on confidentiality. There wasn't a big focus on what I think Donna or Susan called future casting, right? Recognizing trends, preventing conflict, and also passing the baton. So continuing to tap and train incoming mediators. Okay. So then we looked at where we are now. How has everything changed in this last year? So initially, we mentioned that case levels seem to remain pretty steady. And then over the last, Angela, what would you say? I'd say about the last half a year, where case levels have even increased. And it seems like people are taking the time to deal with stuff that they had kept pushing to the side.
Yeah, definitely. I would say the last year, personally, when the pandemic hit, I think like all of us, for the first week or so, we were wondering what our profession would look like and whether we would be able to continue working throughout in the coming year and throughout this last year. And I would say that from my perspective, things have been consistent, if not, as you said, have grown just because this option has been there. And so I'm grateful to see that, and grateful to see that there's going to be a future in continuing with online training as well as online mediation.
Thank you. And as she mentioned, yes, training requests have also increased. And I think part of the reason is that clients, as well as trainers and mediators, have just recognized the ease of training online, that we can get across quite a bit of information in shorter chunks of time. And we don't have to book a conference room and get a caterer, right? It's just, you push a button. It has become very simple. And so we have definitely seen an increase in not just cases, but also requests for training. So I think this makes it even more important for us to step back and say, all right, what should these trainings include? I think one of the other reasons why these requests have increased is that this has kind of been a year for everyone to take stock of where things are and look at how things can be improved. So people are taking time to deal with some of those simmering conflicts, just those ongoing points of tension and places where communication could be improved. And so well, of course, there are always mediations and trainings and reactions to conflicts that pipe up. I think there's also an eye towards how can we improve things long term? How can we set up our office to be a learning organization and a healthy organization? A couple of the other changes that we have seen is that our clients are focusing more on process. And so I think this is another piece that trainings need to start focusing on, is not just talking about the communication between people, but also what is the most effective way to do things. Again, pandemic uprooted everything, right? We all had processes that, for better or for worse, we had become comfortable with. And then you take those processes and throw them upside down, and we have to say, all right, what is really the best way to do things? And so we have seen an increase in requests for let's talk about the process for moving this project from A to B, and bring in a facilitator or bring in a trainer, and let's identify what are the key ways that we can improve here, that we can systematize, that we can make this an even more effective transition. As we talked about earlier, there's definitely been a huge focus on flexibility and clear communication. We know that as we move online, you do lose a little bit of context, right? And so we just need to be a little bit more effective in how we communicate. It's easier when we're face to face, I think, to get to understand a lot of the nuances from the body language and the nonverbals and the leaning in and the hand gestures and the pointing to. And when we have moved online, we have realized that we need to be a little bit more disciplined about how we communicate things, right? I need to focus on, have I said this sentence clearly? Have I explained it? And it's forcing my brain to become more organized. The other big third thing that I've been hearing from clients is that they're appreciating how available their managers are, and that they're enjoying taking the time to work on the management to employee relationship. Of course, managers are still going to be incredibly busy, but they're not constantly traveling and going to conferences and going to other meetings. And so that increase of time, many clients have said, this is fantastic. We're actually enjoying that we can focus more on relationships and building up a healthy organization and dealing with some of those festering issues that we just didn't have time to deal with before. Okay. So during this time, we can decide, do we go back towards what we have done before, or are we going to look forward towards growth? And as Maslow has pointed out, we can really take this time during this pandemic to not just say, okay, where are we, but also look at what are the key things that we want to add to workplace training as we go forward. Okay, so these are the main required skills that our team has identified. First, I think this is something that we can all relate to this year: evolve with the technology. Learn what apps our clients are using. Obviously, we have all become pretty grateful to Zoom for everything it has enabled us to do, but that doesn't mean that every client around the world is using Zoom, right? We have some people that are just communicating via phone. We have some people that are just using WhatsApp or Digital Samba, or the courts or their law firm has blocked Zoom. So this is why I think it's incredibly important for us to educate ourselves. That was one of my big takeaways. Educate yourself ahead of time. What is the key platform that people are using? And learn how to use it, download it, become comfortable with it, run a couple trial cases through it. And so find out what your clients are using, but also find out what they should be using. If you are doing a divorce mediation, educate yourself on what are some of the cool new emerging child custody calculators or spousal support calculators. If you're doing a workplace mediation, look at what some of the issue comparison platforms are out there that are, Robert Bergman has created an amazing one that prioritizes the different issues, and it adds a percentage to them, and you can pull down on the different issues as you start to reach agreement on them. They're incredible and will save clients so much time. And this is, I think, what really shows our clients that this is an opportunity and gets a lot of buy-in for continuing to use online dispute resolution training going forward, so that clients don't feel like, oh, I'm getting a disservice. We had to push this through during the pandemic. It's so unfortunate that we didn't get to meet face to face. No, this was incredible. Look at how fast this mediation or this training went. Look at all of these great apps that we got to use. What a great opportunity. But clients will only feel that way if we make it an opportunity, right? If we really are using this online time as a resource. But let's face it, it's not always perfect, right? It's not always easy. As Susan mentioned, Zoom fatigue is definitely a real thing. So for training to stay effective, we simply need to keep clients engaged, which means every few minutes we need to be changing the visuals but not just the visuals, also the method. So it can't just be me clicking through a PowerPoint screen. It has to be, now I'm going to whole screen, now I'm annotating, now I'm going to breakout rooms, now I'm sharing a whiteboard, now I'm doing a poll, things that are continuously keeping clients engaged, so that this feels like a dynamic process, right? I mean, think about it. If you were training face-to-face, you'd constantly be moving around and then drawing something on the board and then pulling up volunteers and then pulling out some kind of a prop to demonstrate things. We have to be willing to do the same thing in an online environment, so that your clients are continually interested in what you have to say. I had to look this up. It's called the primacy recency effect, which means that your clients, which means simply that our brains, our clients as well as us, pay attention whenever there's a transition, whenever there's something new, right? Whenever the screen changes or the sound changes, that's when your brain says, hey, we need to be a little bit more awake now. And that happens naturally in a face-to-face environment. But I do think we need to be a little bit more intentional about doing that when we're in an online environment. So again, every few minutes, don't just change what slide you're showing, but also change how you are presenting that information. I realize I'm not doing that at all right now. I have been on the slide for probably half an hour at this point. So, you know, do what I say and not what I do. And I think there has been a pretty resounding resolve that says we definitely need shorter sessions and flexible times, that we just cannot be effective for 8 hours online anymore. Instead, let's break up those long sessions into shorter sessions where we just focus on perhaps a couple of issues at a time. And then we're really getting our clients at their best, but you know what? They're getting us at their best as well. I think that when we try to schedule these really long sessions or have them back to back, then we are treating ourselves like a robot. And that's really what our clients are getting, right? And that's not what they signed up for. They signed up for someone who's curious and who's present and who can be fully there. So I think these were the main skills that we learned as we move online. So here are a couple of the other points that the work group came up with that I want to make sure we cover. Simply realizing that online training, oh my gosh, it absolutely has been working. Everybody's needs can be fully met online. They're easier to schedule. It's easier to incorporate tracking and helpful tools. And of course, we can talk about hybrid options, which include role plays, having a training buddy, incorporating quizzes, etc. But one of the big things that we liked was how easy it is to mentor, how easy it is to bring in new ideas and new folks. So one idea that we came up with was this concept of having a Zoom moderator, right? It was always kind of weird to bring in a new person and have them sitting at the conference table or have them sitting in the training room and just say, oh, this is a new mediator that I'm mentoring. But if you call them a Zoom moderator, then they can be sitting there during the entire session and absorbing everything that you're saying, and you can learn a lot from them afterwards as well. So that's one of the big things that we have enjoyed with moving to online is bring in the new people, bring in new voices, go out and adopt a mentor and learn from them and give them a chance to learn from you, because it's easy now. All right, just a couple more thoughts here. So we didn't feel we needed to spend time on this one. Will we return to completely face-to-face trainings and mediations? Nope. We have all realized the benefits of online, and whether it's a hybrid, whether it's fully online, there are just so many benefits of meeting online and incorporating these skills and having them right at our fingertips. We just don't want to give them up. So a couple of the other pieces we wanted to point out, it is some of the other benefits with online dispute resolution for improving dispute resolution training is that now we can instantly communicate standards. Did you see all of the standards and the links that we shared in the chat right at the beginning of this meeting? How fantastic is that? That people around the world can instantly say, here's our standard and your standard and your standard, and let's meet together to come up with some of the key standards that we all need to include. And this goes back to our first point, and this is really where we want to end with, is coming up with a set of standards that all workplace training needs to include. So these are the pieces that we said, we need to put these back in our backpack. These are the key things that need to be included in every workplace training going forward, to not just deal with those symptomatic issues that come up, but also preventing the issues that we know are going to come up later. And these are the key skills that we felt were really required for creating a healthy office. So just to spend a second on these, the slides available online for anyone who is creating a workplace training. This was what came from our experience that every training needed to include. The ability to listen, to hear, not just to respond, training leaders, helping leaders to lead by example, the importance of just being considerate. Let's face it, this is kind of a skill that we all need to learn. And creating a high standard of a conflict-free environment, not a dispute-free environment, not an argument-free environment, because those are going to happen, but that it doesn't need to escalate, that we can have a difficult conversation and have it be exciting and dynamic without escalating. Patience, empathy, compassion, and the importance of starting to include training for trauma, diversity, cultural sensitivity, as well as cultural immersion. And finally, the ability to reframe. Right? What a basic conflict resolution skill that would, gosh, just make so many workplace conversations more effective. Okay, so to summarize those, the key skills that we saw: how to communicate effectively with the team, teach people how to bring up concerns, and teach leaders how to create a collaborative environment. Okay, work with a team, have a difficult conversation, and teach leaders how to create an environment. So thank you so much. This has been a fantastic experience, and I'm so grateful to Jim and to Woody for organizing this, and also to my team for sharing all of your expertise. Thank you all.
Great, and thank you, Claire, for sharing all of your expertise and tips and tricks there. I hope you can look through the questions from while you were talking, because there were a couple of people who wanted to know. I mean, somebody did get the primacy recency effect that they asked about, but there were a couple other things that people were asking about that you went through. And I know you're sharing those slides as well, but I think part of the questions had to do with what you were talking about. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So, I'm going to also do the web thingy here, the PowerPoint. So let me get here from my current slide. Go ahead. Okay, great. So thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Donna Silverberg, and I'm going to be joined in this presentation by Tawny Robertson, who is in Tucson, Arizona. I am outside of Portland, Oregon, in a little town of Mount Hood, Parkdale, looking at Mount Hood from where I'm sitting right now. I'm so glad to have listened to Susan and Claire about the ideas that they have shared, because I feel like so much of what you have said, there really is congruency between what we do, what you do, what the other does, between the three of us. There are some nuances that I think are different and special. And what we want to do here is just take this opportunity really to share with so many mediators and collaborative lawyers, students, policy people, to just say a little bit about what public policy and large group mediation is. It's a little different, and we will also touch on what we need to consider for online mediation, much of what has been touched on by Susan and Claire already. So before I start, I want to thank our sub-team and the people who came to one or more of our sessions. We had Alana Naster, who's been in the field for, I think, I don't know, pushing 40 years doing public policy work, Annie Kilberg-Smith, Betsy Daniels, myself, Janet Chance, Ken Cloak, Kristen Wright, Laurel Singer, Tawny Robertson, Toby Berkman, and Winter Wheeler from all around the country, been involved in all of these conversations. So it's been a really great. One of the things I want to say is, well, first, our graphics are not quite as flashy as Susan and Claire's, but I think they're going to get the point across. So this is what our trainings used to look like, right? We used to all sit around for a public policy large group. My first training looked just like this. Not everybody was blue, but where we just were all sitting around a flip chart and trying to learn how to facilitate and mediate a larger group. Now they all look like this. And who's attending the trainings that we're doing? Most people who come, this is an additive skill. So this is in addition to the mediation training, the intro mediation training, or maybe even a family mediation training that they've had. But they want to mediate in this area. They want to make a difference in public policy and public processes. And so they come here to learn about the way public processes work in conjunction or parallel to the mediated conversations. So that's one group of people. Another group of people are people who already are working in the public sector or worked in this public sector and have retired. And if they're still working there, they want to learn how to better manage public disputes, either as a mediator or with added mediator-like skills. So not unlike what Claire was just talking about in the workplace. So learning negotiation and communication skills that can help them better manage public disputes from their position as a manager or administrator. So I'm going to let Tawny talk a little bit about the different stages here, but you know, we have this graphic here of the slightly different stages because sometimes this is who shows up. When I was doing some work on the Columbia River, I think we had something like 4,000 people who showed up into the place we were at, many of whom were wearing costumes outside of the forum to make a point about the position they took. So Tawny, let me pass this on over to you.
Thanks, Donna, and so glad to be here. And thanks for the first two presentations. Those are fascinating, and it's really interesting to hear of all the common elements, and especially in the online realm. So what we want to talk about just briefly is some of the different aspects to public policy and large group mediation and settings. So first, because of our complexity of issues, stakeholders, institutional and decision context, we always start out with a conflict and situation assessment to really get a lay of the land. And then based on that, design a tailored process that will really get us to outcomes. In terms of convening, we can kind of think of two kinds of convening. One is the who convenes, and in our kind of work, it's careful consideration of who are the conveners, they may be the decision makers. We might have co-convening by two agencies. That's a big component of our work. And then of course the platform itself, or platforms, as has already been mentioned, that will work for the particular set of parties involved. And this sub-bullet about the strong need to orient the group to the online tools, we found that online definitely increases access for all the participants, as long as there is, everybody's on the same page and skill level. We do pre-training in our training just for those people who need the added training in the use of Zoom, for example. In terms of communication, information and sharing and negotiation, similar to the other two presentations, just that we've got a more complex setting. So a lot of tools and a lot of best practice, and it's really about tailoring it to suit. Agreement and ratification, a lot of times our processes need to end in something, a plan, an agreement, some kind of new decision, whatever it is. We have to consider this from the beginning and build it into the process. Which leaders, which decision-making processes, and how are we going to effectively engage them and their support? And then finally, implementation. Getting to agreement is only partway through our kind of process, because if it just sits on a shelf and doesn't get implemented, then it's not worth it. And so we often provide ongoing support after the implementation itself. And very likely we just don't understand the rest of this work, and you guys might do the same thing.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for that, Tawny. There are a couple other considerations that we have as public policy and large group mediators because of the complexity that Tawny was just talking about. You know, oftentimes it's not so clear when we get started. So who's going to be present, what we're going to be discussing, how we do the work. It tends to be much less clear than in some other mediation work where you have, you know, when Susan and I were talking, she knows it's going to be a husband and wife and maybe another husband and wife, right? But she knows who's going to be sitting there. We don't necessarily know that. And so we have to help parties define and agree on the purpose even, because they may, if they're talking about a particular policy issue, they may have different ideas of what they need to be talking about. So we have to figure out what is the purpose that will suit everybody's needs. We then design, coach, prepare multiple groups for those sessions together. And as I say, it's not clear, and flexibility, which both Susan and Claire were talking about, definitely is true for us. Equity shows up regularly and in challenging ways in these policy cases. They're in the public eye, they deal with public issues. We're talking often about policies that have had disparate impacts. And so we need to have people at the table. What we have found interesting online is we are seeing more faces than we have seen in our in-person sessions, showing up, more different faces than we have in the past. So we are able to be flexible with timing, and it's made accessibility to our conversations much greater for a much wider breadth of people. And I'm not saying, and in saying that, I'm not saying this, but that we have completely embraced, as much as it sounds like Susan and Claire have, the online format. But I think that we are seeing some real benefits, and figuring out a hybrid may be a very useful way to move forward. As we've heard from the others, public conflicts also often have trauma at their stem, and so we have to handle that. So that needs to be included in our trainings, not just for helping parties through that, but also for helping ourselves as mediators through those moments when we might get triggered by something that happens when we're doing some of our mediation work with other people who are simultaneously being triggered. As mediators, we need to do, as practitioners, and train everything we can to assure that all of the impacted voices have a seat at the table in some way. Maybe it's not the individual, but that they're represented somehow, either online or in person. That's true. We need to make sure that they have the capacity to negotiate and make decisions about the issues and questions that are in front of the entire group. And then we have to help them gain and exercise whatever power they might have. We thought that it might be useful just, to just give you an example here. So if we were going to get together and have conversations about toxics in our waterways, the first thing, if we look at this waterway here, the first thing we see are the fish and maybe the species in there. But we also then need to think about, who might be drinking that water. And then in terms of the water itself, how is it being impacted by all of these different environments? And if we're going to have a policy conversation about toxics in our waterways, we're going to have to make sure that we have representatives from the farming industry and ag industry that can talk about pesticides and where they're going and how we might reduce them, or talk to the high-tech industry about how are they using their water to cool down the tools that they're putting into our phones, et cetera. They're using it out of rivers and then putting that back in the river. What is that doing to the toxicity and temperature? Same with, in Portland, it's kind of a funny little side note. In Portland, they did a number of tests in the river outside Portland, and they found really high levels of caffeine in the water. Caffeine, a number of other things, but the caffeine rate was like, wow, we really are a bunch of coffee drinkers here in the Northwest. So we have to think about all of these things, and how do we represent those voices at the table? Who can do it in a way that's legitimate? And Tawny's going to talk a little bit more about that. But I just thought having a sense for all of you of what we might be looking at, what we need to be considering. It's complex, and training that to our trainees online has both benefits and drawbacks. So Tawny, can you talk about some of the other unique qualities for our trainings?
Yes. Okay. So first, as we've said, we have a lot of, it's complex. Parties, issues, the science, the technical aspects, the institutional setting, et cetera. So obviously the training needs to integrate all of that. We do use graphics. I'll show one at the end. There's always parallel public processes, another planning process. Maybe you're in a county and the county has its own planning process going on, and there's another agency has a process going on, and that larger setting has a lot of impact and importance to make sure it's dovetailing or connecting. Culture, as has been mentioned repeatedly today, is always a piece of our work, And because we have many parties, many issues, there's different cultural aspects, whether it's actual like ethnicities, whether it's ranchers and urban recreators, whatever it is, we have to adapt it to work. I just want to mention that recently we did an online facilitation training in Spanish. And so a few of the elements that we put together a planning team of the trainees, a small group, to help us tailor it to suit their context. We did the whole training. We used WhatsApp as our main tool because everybody could get access to it. We did 2.5-hour evening sessions, and Claire mentioned the importance of being adaptive and flexible to what's going to work for the participants. And we had to allow phone participation for people without Wi-Fi and or computers, and with the one ground rule of no participating while driving. And then lastly, confidentiality, obviously pretty important, as well as open public meetings. There's open public meeting laws at different government levels, and how to work within that. It varies, but so, including in our trainings, various ways to deal with that. We had our local city commission that shifted to Zoom after a long period of time of not being able to figure out how to allow for that, but then they didn't allow breakouts. And then they didn't allow chat. So it's that ever evolving situation that we have to train for as well.
Right.
In terms of, so we had the picture at the bottom, these bigger public meetings, that kind of setting. And now we've got the Zoom. Everybody's like, you probably dream in Zoom windows by now. The nuances of the group psychology means, for example, groupthink versus how to allow for more individual thinking, and then bringing it together in the group, and just how the group is influencing each other. I think we've already touched on who needs to be included in the decision process. For us, sometimes a situation isn't ripe for mediation, and really understanding that. We do, a lot of us don't do just mediation, but we do a lot of upstream work, whether it's building and facilitating large scale collaborative processes that probably have some conflict in them, or it's inspired by the need to prevent a full-blown public dispute. And we use a lot of process tools. I'm going to share in 1 second about the value of using graphics. 2 other things I want to just add before we turn to that last slide is how an element that we're talking a lot about now, and probably a lot of you are, is the need to do training on how to do hybrid meetings, where there's some in person and some online. And how different, there's a lot of different ideas out there and different experiences. So I think that, just to note that. And then the beyond training, capacity building support by having, like today's session, support groups of facilitators and mediators that working more in a similar field that can share. We set up a network in the Southwest of facilitators working on similar issues, and we have monthly Zoom sessions where we're sharing best practices, helping problem solve, that kind of thing. It's hard to get everything in one training, so those kinds of options in the kind of beyond training.
Nice.
And then lastly, for me,
That.
Our processes are really complicated, but so how do you get people on the same page? We use this is a process design graphic. We use a lot of mediators in kind of our public policy realm. We use these kind of graphics. It's got the timeline, it's got the different kinds of convenings, it's got how it connects to adjacent processes, how you engage the leadership, when you have subgroup meetings, where things are getting crafted, where you are in the process, which is like we are here. And these things evolve and you keep updating it, but it's literally to help people get on the same page. Thanks.
All right. So thank you for that, Tawny, and thank you for this incredible visual here. I think it does really show you that it is a little different in these processes that we're doing. And hopefully what we've said, I think one of the things I wanted to add in terms of training for public policy mediators and certification or qualifications, there really are no certifications and qualifications. Trainings are done by both private firms and also now in the university setting through the University Network for Collaborative Governance. And there are rosters that exist, some which are public rosters at different agencies, federal and state agencies, but there really is no certification at this point for people doing public policy work. I think the biggest thing that helps in that qualification end is the first time somebody goes out to do a public policy case as a mediator who's never done them before, they realize immediately that this is different than anything else they've ever done. And I think all of us who are in the field get calls pretty regularly from people saying, I agreed to do this case. Can you help me from the side? And we do that. That is part of our practice. So we are done with ours, and what we now want to do is put questions to the whole forum, and we'd like you to put your answers in the chat, referring to A or B below, and just share with each other, share with us what tools and strategies you've found to be most useful in your online mediations and mediation trainings, and what you're struggling with most. And if you could put an A or B for, useful is A, B is struggling, I think that'd be helpful for all. I'm going to stop sharing and then turn this to Jim and see, are there some questions or things that you have been fielding while we've been talking that you'd like us to address? Claire, sorry.
Donna, sorry, would you mind just sharing your screen again so people can see what was the A and the B?
I sure can.
Just for 1 second before we move to Jim. Okay. So A is what's useful and B is what's struggling. Thanks.
Yes. Tools and strategies that are useful. B is struggling. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask a question kind of across the board of the different panelists, because I think I'm hearing a theme and that it's evolved over time and we may not be fully aware of it. But I would offer, I think back in the day, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong about this, I used to try to minimize individual participant communications prior to a joint mediation meeting. There were a variety of reasons for this. One of them is I wasn't sure what my confidentiality or caucus understanding, was before we had gotten together and talked about it, et cetera. So that was the theme. It was kind of this hearings concept almost, that there's a date, there's a time, let's show up, we'll do our best. And I would kind of protect myself as a bit of a tabula rasa, if you will, in anticipation of the mediation, and that clear impartiality, neutrality was somehow helpful. But what I think I'm finding online, whether it's family, an elder, or workplace, and I heard it relative to public policy, is that in the world of online mediation, we're often more flexible and nimble. It's not a matter, for example, of people getting in cars, driving across town, parking, waiting. We don't have to physically get together. It's very easy to meet. And that the combination, I think it's just being effective. I found that I'm often doing little introductory meetings with individual parties. One of the great benefits is that despite the Zoom and online challenges of developing rapport, especially with everybody, present, that I have, 5, 10, or 15 minutes with each individual just to meet them privately. And in fact, the excuse for these meetings is usually, let's be sure that the technology works, that we're all coming through, that you're connected, that you're comfortable. But the reality is I get to just meet them a little bit and hear just a little bit from them, and as well as make sure that they're technically as comfortable as possible, which of course benefits the start of the joint meeting. And I've actually found a vehicle that I think allows us to do this, which is the terms and conditions of your services on your website. Back in the day, we had to get them to sign an agreement to mediate or a confidentiality agreement or something. But I think we have a new vehicle now where we can say, to the extent you take advantage of our services, they would be under the terms and conditions, reach it here. And what that might say is that the mediator may well have an individual short caucus with respective parties to have a brief discussion about the situation, as well as confirm their ability to comfortably and competently take advantage of the online process, that we have this opportunity. So my question for the group is, are you in fact finding the mediation field shifting toward getting going more with individual respective discussions with participants, then bringing folks together? Or are you continuing to do a minimization of individual communications and a focus on that first joint meeting? Any thoughts or comments on that?
Jim, it's actually funny that you said that, because I had posted in the chat before you made your point precisely that. I have been using those technology tests to build rapport, to gain a better understanding of individuals' body language, to let them see who I am, and replace that 5-minute chitter chat we would have before an actual mediation session in person would get started. So I am finding that I'm having more interaction with both counsel and parties prior to the quote unquote actual mediation. And oftentimes it's very useful because I'm diving in with a better perspective of what the parties are looking for, what the emotions and animosity may be behind the scene. And that allows me to have more time to think creatively about how I'm going to diffuse tensions and get the parties to utilize our quote unquote working time more effectively.
Wonderful. That's great. Great example.
I offer that in addition to developing the rapport relationship and things working out most smoothly, I think there's kind of a policy issue embedded here, which is I'm finding that mediators are becoming more proactive in reaching out. So we hear of a dispute, we hear of one party, and that it's more common that a mediator might contact and wonder whether mediation might be good, that we're becoming a bit more mediation activists, and that in fact the online environment generally is very interesting in this regard. For example, 80% of the people who go to LegalZoom or Complete Case, or who not only express a desire to do their divorce online, to do all the papers online, but they actually pay for it, okay? 80% of these folks aren't able to complete that process because as soon as they get to a blank that they don't agree on, the whole thing goes sideways. And of course, that's the moment what they really need is a mediator. And I can think of lots of other, like real estate transactions as an example, where things are threatening to go sideways and we want to get somebody in there as quickly as possible. So I just am raising this possibility that as we move forward as a field, we may in fact find it advantageous to be more proactive, more reaching out to individuals who are involved in a difficult situation, just to make sure that they're aware of the online mediation possibility. And in fact, I'm finding that the way my mediations are getting going is changing dramatically. I've never been contacted by all parties at the same time, saying, would you mediate? It's almost always a protagonist, who wants to change the situation. So I've liberated myself to be more willing to have those individual conversations and explore the possibility of mediation, maybe even along the lines that you would traditionally do in public policy.
I was going to say, I think that some of the in-person trainings that we all used to do when we'd have an advanced training and we bring a whole bunch of different mediators together, we started finding that, that people who do family cases could maybe benefit from talking to people in advance the way we have in public policy for quite a long time now. And vice versa, we in the public policy area could learn a lot of different things from people in family, workplace, and others. So I think that these conversations and this moment in the field is really an important one for us, because I think we are able to reconnect online. I mean, how many people have we got here right now? For 818 now from all around the world, who are able to be sharing their ideas. And I hope you're looking at the chat. And if you don't do it now, I want to urge you at the end of this session to press save, so that you can look back through and see the A's and the B's, that see what the tools people are finding useful, and the things that they're struggling with. Because I think the struggling part, we're all together going to have to figure out how to solve those problems. And I'm hoping we did post our initial draft from our subgroup of apps that we're loving, ways that we're doing training and practice that we found useful online. I do feel I need to say again on behalf of folks in my subgroup that not everybody was super excited about the online stuff. And with that said, most of our clients are one of the seats at the table at least is taken by a public entity, and most public entities aren't being allowed to meet in large groups right now. So it's going to be a while. And this is hard work to do just online without having having that in-person connection. And as somebody said, being able to see someone's foot moving under the table, being able to see them clicking their pen, being able to see them doing something other than just with their face can be super instructive to us as mediators, and can really help in difficult moments that we don't have that. I think everybody should do like the Paul Ekman training now for online micro expressions. So Claire and Susan, what are you all thinking about as you're reading through these things, as you're hearing all this? What are you thinking?
Yeah, Donna, I was just going to say, I love this conversation. And I think one of the things that I've taken out of my entire experience, both as an online mediator and now an online trainer, is that one of the things as a profession we likely need to do, whether we are a mediator or a trainer or both, is expand our thought process to, it's not a matter of taking what we did in a brick and mortar and squeezing it into the box of online. There are different capabilities that in some ways are better online. And there are some things that, as we showed in our slides, there are some cons to it that may take modification. I think as a profession, as with many professions, we get very stuck in doing things the way that we've always done them. And if we are going to grow and change and adapt new technologies and modalities, we have to consider that we might have to do things differently, much to what Jim was saying about the pre-mediation meetings. That's a part of my online mediation training, is that should be a part of the onboarding process now, because there's more technological aspects that need to be taken care of, as well as the rapport building and the fact finding, et cetera. So I like that just by being here, I think it's showing that people are opening their minds to those concepts and are sharing these ideas. I see an amazing conversation in the chat. So that's what this made me think of.
Yeah, that's great. And even just in light of what you're saying there, Catherine from the community mediation folks, where she's at, said that they've been doing these online for exactly what you're just saying, to build rapport, develop, manage expectations, really to get ahead before you're even in the Zoom room, to have a sense of how you can better manage this conflict, right? Claire, how about you?
So before I forget, we are going to be saving this chat and we'll be posting it with a video.
Oh, great.
Because yeah, this is a really rich chat. So thank you for everyone for all the resources and ideas you're sharing. Second, what I have really noticed online is, as we've discussed, we can absolutely still have that rapport and still have that connection, but we just have to be intentional, I think, about framing it in a different way. So a big piece that I've been doing is just trying to do a 5-minute check-in with clients before we get into any mediation or content stuff. And I say that it's an AV test, so that we can test out their microphone and their video. But I'm really just being sneaky there. What I'm trying to do is establish rapport and set the standard right from the beginning that I care about what you have to say. I'm curious. This is a safe place. How can I make this more comfortable for you? And I let them know we're not going to talk about any content stuff. You don't have to be worried about this meeting. Just want to make sure that everything's working. And then I have a chance to get to know them. Because if not, I've noticed when I start the meeting and I jump right into it with however many people, it's harder to start with a blank slate. For instance, right now I'm looking at Susan and nodding at her, and I'm giving her lots of good nonverbal feedback. And now I'm looking at Jason and giving him lots of good nonverbal feedback. They don't know, right? There's only one webcam. So it's harder to have that one-on-one connection through Zoom unless we take some time through breakout rooms or a previous conversation to establish that. But I think once we've established that, it can still be just as effective, and you can maintain that connection and that feeling of a safe space through the rest of the Zoom mediation. We just have to do something first to make that first connection, is what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so we were going to do just a quick, is there any more future casting, Claire and Susan, that you want to do?
I just had a couple of quick comments because I think it's been raised, but this whole issue of hybrid is, I think, the wave of the future. That's my personal belief, but I've spoken to a lot of professionals and colleagues about this. And by hybrid, I mean where some participants are remote and some participants are in person. That could be the mediation process itself. That could be the training where we are beaming out some of our training, but have some live participants. What I think we need to be thinking about as a profession, both mediators and trainers, is that brings up both technology issues that can be fairly complicated and need to be handled far in advance of just flipping open our laptop and thinking we're just going to Zoom, and when there are people in person and remote. But also there are definite psychological components to that that need to be minimized or need to be managed. And that is also not something to be done on the fly. And that's likely something that we'll have to be including in our trainings sooner rather than later. And that's been something that I've noticed, and maybe colleagues have noticed this as well, as a trainer throughout the pandemic. A silver lining of the pandemic, if you can call it that, is that we've had a huge, massive rush to online. So we've had advances in technology. We've had the benefit of a wealth of experience that everybody here has, and we're now able to share. And we also, venture capital has come to our arena and is kicking out new stuff for us every single day. And so it's not just a matter of training and learning for today, it's taking advantage of opportunities like this to continue to grow and to modify. Because my training today does not look like my training from 6 months ago, and that training didn't look like the one from 6 months before that. So that would be my future casting, is we are still in a place of rapid change. And if we're going to train, we have to stay on top of that.
Nice. Great.
I agree.
Okay.
I think we've talked about this, but I do think that, let's say a couple years from now, the mediation process and the training process will look like a hybrid, but I might be describing it slightly differently than Susan. I can see, let's say if you're going to have a long-term relationship with someone, Donna, such as your long-term public policy mediations, that we might have an initial face-to-face meeting where we get to know everyone. And then, okay, for goodness sake, like we've already met, why not do the rest of it online? And then we can have private breakout rooms for individual conversations, and then we can jump out to the large group when we need to. But I think that's really what we're going to see, that even people who decide to mediate or train face-to-face, sometimes that they're still going to do a big chunk of it online.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I think that, one of the things that we miss in public policy is that we didn't include this in our slideshow. So, if you've stayed on long enough, here's the extra thing that we try and do is we have field trips with the group, right? So many of the photographs that were in our slides were photographs from field trips that I've taken with groups that we were talking about that environment so they could see it. That is something that is definitely missing in this environment. Some of my clients have gotten very clever and taken, the GoPros to go show us some things, but it's not the same as being inside a dam and watching the water spilling through the cement and the little fishies going past the window, and in order to have a conversation about salmon passage in a power situation, right? So that's one thing. I think that in terms of future casting, the positive that I would give is that our networks have expanded, right? Susan and I were reflecting on this the other day together, that we would never have met had it not been for this conversation, because we do such different work, and yet we couldn't stop talking to each other. Our husbands kept coming in saying, "Stop it, get off." So I mean, that's just one example, but I think that what I've experienced, I don't know about all of you, is as a curious person, I have attended more interdisciplinary type trainings over the last year than I probably have in the last 20 years of my practice. And it gives us the opportunity to have interdisciplinary conversation amongst each other, to really up our games in different ways. What could I learn from Susan in terms of the way she deals with families, with the empathy and the emotion that might enhance some of the work I'm doing on very sensitive toxics issues in an environmental justice neighborhood, right? That might be useful to me. And there might be some things vice versa that would be sharing as well. So my future casting is that we're going to have interdisciplinary mediation tools and approaches and pairings even for particular types of cases. And so all that kind of excites me. I don't know about all of you. We are now at 10:47, and I think it was around now that we were going to turn this back to you, Jim, to wrap us up. We were trying a different format this time of not having people raise their hands, because those of us who watched the global one last time, it was a little, it wasn't as clear as doing it this way. So I just want to let you all know that the chat that you have here is our primary way to interface with you on this one. We did it intentionally. Curious to know how that was for you, actually. How did you experience that? So if you want to make some comment about that, that can help us with the future forms as well. And with that, I want to say thank you, Claire, Susan, to your teams, to Tawny, to Gabrielle, to Michael, and I know that your other person left already. So thank you very much for all of this. And Jim.
Good. Just a bunch of things to wrap up. There is an evaluation and comment form, and the links in the chat. I'll repost it in just a moment, or Claire, if you wanted, that form is on the main forum page. Thank you. So I want to just do a slight backcasting also, because the reality is this online mediation stuff has been growing for 35 years. And for example, it started with people getting email addresses, and then eventually they would get online in directories, and they'd have a nice website, and then there's video on the website and contact forms and taking payment and exchanging documents, et cetera, et cetera. And it's because of that 35 years of incremental development that when the pandemic hit past March, it was a pretty reasonable thing for folks to say, hey, let's just swap in this Zoom or this Legaler or this GoToMeeting rich media platform, and that can kind of be a surrogate for our ability to get together face to face. And it was not a bad start, to be honest with you, but we've learned a lot of things along the way. For example, Zoom fatigue, you can't do the long meetings. And I would also like to highlight that I really think the magic of the effective mediator is the ability to integrate the rich media communication with the development of asynchronous text, because commonly our deliverable is still a textual document, an understanding, a memorandum of an agreement. And that's really the magic that is a bigger topic than we can go into in the moment. But also think about the hardest thing for us to appreciate is the acceleration and the pace of change. As much as we're trying to wrap our head around all this that's going on, we can only do so much in a particular day. And this is much bigger than we can imagine. It's what I call mediation's renaissance. We literally have the ability to communicate, as a slight overstatement, with any individual on planet Earth pretty much into their pocket or purse and just about for free. I mean, the friction of getting together and having communications has just dramatically changed. And along with that, accessibility, convenience, affordability, and the like. And I want to highlight also that I would offer some measure of mediation is better than no mediation. Okay, so the meaning of things is often, what are you comparing it to? So maybe we miss the twitching foot, or the warm cookies. But if we're comparing online mediation not to the Rolls-Royce brick and mortar, but if we're comparing it to nothing, which has pretty much been the option this last year, it's literally a miracle. It's a miracle. John Healy and I used to talk about how far will this go? And the almost as good as being there, rich media communication is what we called the Holy Grail. And what would happen when we found the Holy Grail? And I think we're experiencing that right now. So I just so appreciate these conversations. They help me to move my thinking forward. I love so many people getting to be introduced to so many other people. I feel like we're able to bring the global mediation community together. And so needless to say, we're just at the beginning of figuring all this online stuff out, but it is a new beginning. And final comment, what a gift that we really had a mass training event, with the pandemic setting in. Not only were professionals, mediators learning how to use Zoom and GoToMeeting and Legaler and the other platforms, but the society as a whole and on a global basis was facing the same communicational challenges. And so we had our clientele, we had the mass society learning to communicate in these rich media platforms, not because they wanted to mediate, but because they wanted to talk to their family or within their business or what have you. So, I don't like to speak in terms of silver linings either, but the world changed. The world has changed. And we're all about communication. We're all about supporting people to have respectful dialogue and reach optimized solutions. And this is our moment. This is our time. And it's happening. And it's happening on a global basis. It's really crazy. But I'm just so thrilled to take part. I'm thrilled that Mediate's able to sponsor these forums. I will do a quick share of screen just to remind us of the next forums we have coming up. We agreed in this forum that we could reserve all the hard questions for the next forum, which is the one that Colin will be facilitating on standards, ethics, and new technologies. Claire, any more from you? I don't know if Colin is there either. All right, well.
Yeah,
please.
Colin's on another call.
Oh, no, Colin's
No,
here.
he's here.
Oh, okay, great.
No, this was a great session, and it set a very high bar for next week. So I know I and my co-conspirators are now thinking, boy, we better go sharpen our pencils to see if we can match it. But I agree with all the enthusiasm. Thank you for all the hard work.
All right, well, this is my favorite moment in every training and forum, and that is at the end where I encourage people to actually unmute and to go ahead and give the panel a round of applause and smile and wave. And while you're doing that, I get to do a screen grab.
There you go.
All right.
Wonderful job. Wonderful job.
Thank you
Great
all.
job.
Thank you.
Yay.
Good.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
everyone.
Susan.
Good
and
job.
Donna and
Good
Jim.
job. Great
We have to
job.
figure out how to get you
Thank you all
cookies.
so much.
Yeah.
We'll get the video and the text and the chat links out to you within 2 days, as well as a Zoom login for the next forum next Friday. And again, thank you so very much for taking part.